Before the video, this is a compilation of some of the creepiest classic true scary stories found on the internet. I've only ever read one of these stories on my channel about a year ago, but like I said, they're all classics. This is a collection of some of the scariest, and now that that's out of the way, I hope you enjoyed the video and let's begin. This took place 10 years ago when I was a freshman in college. This is the first time I've ever recounted this story in full detail to anyone. I attended college in a rural mountain area in the Northeast, a small school tucked away in the rolling hills of the mountains, the type of place where the beauty and casual grace of nature is juxtaposed by the ugliness of humanity. The newspaper was ultra-conservative, and you couldn't go too deep into the woods beyond a few trees without seeing some trace of meth activity. You know the type of place I mean. Anyway, one of my new friends from college discovered somehow an abandoned train trestle deep into the woods about 5 miles from campus, basically in no man's land. I have no idea and don't remember how he found this place because it was very much off the path. The trestle crossed above a river which placidly flowed about 40 feet below. It was actually quite beautiful, and we began going there maybe 3 times a week. Just hanging out on the trestle, watching the water below and the open sky above. We'd drink 40s there, smoke a bowl there, bring some girls there, you know, stuff like that. Eventually, we began jumping off the trestle into the water below and then climbing back up. It was just a very college-y thing to do. Our chill spot, basically. So, one day, just needing to get away from the dorms and away from it all, I decided to go by myself to the trestle for a swim. It was about 7 p.m., so I still had a good hour or so of dim sunlight, and I brought a flashlight for the walk home when I was sure it would be dark. I made the trek through the pathways of the woods as I had done 100 times before, left my towel and flashlight on the trestle and jumped into the water. The water was about 10 to 15 feet deep, I'd say. It flowed almost imperceptibly. You might as well be swimming in a stagnant pool. However, about maybe 50 yards away from the trestle, the river narrows and the current picks up significantly. Then about 20 yards after that, there is a maybe 20-foot high waterfall that bubbles and splashes with extreme violence. We used to watch large objects go over and never come back up again. So there I am, dimly bobbing my head in and out of the water, doing underwater flips, etc. When I pop my head out of the water, I happen to glance to the side of the river and see a man walking towards the water. The water is kind of impeding my view, so I don't see him fluidly walking towards the water. I more see him in different stages of being closer to the water, like flipping through a flip book. He's 15 feet away, 10 feet away, 5 feet away. I can barely give you a description. Maybe 6 feet tall, pale, skinny, black hair pulled back in a ponytail. What I do remember most about his appearance was the extremely empty look on his face and in his eyes, like he was doing something mundane, like taking out the trash or raking leaves. I'm treading water, not knowing what to think, and I see that he is no longer beside the river. He dove in, and he's swimming pin straight directly at me so fast. I try to swim the opposite way, but within a minute I feel him grab my ankle and tug. I tried to scream, but water filled my mouth. While I'm underwater, he lets go and goes up for air, then grabs back on and pulls me again. It seems like he's done this before, and I never once saw him after he jumped into the water. He's gradually pulling me to where the current picks up before the waterfall. I start to realize this and just start fucking flipping out. I'm kicking, screaming, cursing, to no effect. Finally, I feel the current start to take me and I twist away towards the waterfall. I look back and I see this fucking guy just casually swimming back to where he jumped into the water, not even looking at me. This is by far the scariest moment of my life as I approach the waterfall. Long story short, I go over and I'm underwater for a long time, over a minute. The water above unrelentingly pushing me under. The only reason I survived was there was a large log that had gone over, and I grabbed it and used the leverage against the bottom to push me away from the crushing water. I survived, obviously, but then I had to trek the miles back to my dorm in the dark without my flashlight, every step of the way thinking he would come back to finish the job. The next year, a football player drowned going over that fall. The news said it was because there was an extreme current due to the recent rainfall, but I've always wondered about that. Before I start, here's a bit of context to my story. My husband and I lived in a small 2-floor house with 2 main entrances, one along the front and the other on the side of the house, which opens up into the laundry room. When we're too busy or it's too late to walk our dog, we hook his collar onto a long line that's attached to one of the pipes on the corner of our house so that he could use the bathroom. We used to do this from the door in our laundry room, but we noticed the large step from the door to the ground had been taking a toll on his hips. As a result, we started letting him out through the front door instead, since the porch is much closer to the ground. This particular night, I was home alone with my dog and it was around midnight when I decided to let him outside one last time before going to bed. I hook him up to his line, close the door, and lock it before heading into the kitchen to put away the dishes. This was pretty routine. Even if he used the bathroom quickly, he liked to walk around along the front and side of the house for a few minutes before coming back inside. As I'm putting away the dishes, I hear a scratch on the door, which is how my dog signals that he wants to come back inside, so I head over to let him back in. Since I've watched way too many scary movies, I always look through the door's peephole before opening the door. Out of habit, I look to check that my dog is in front of the door. Instead, I see a man staring very intently at the door handle. I freeze with my hand on the door handle. I don't know how much time went by, but then I heard another scratch, this one louder than the last. This kind of wakes me up from my initial shock and I run to grab my cell phone. I call my husband to tell him what's happening. He was very confused. I probably wasn't explaining the situation very well, but he says that he's heading home. This is when I realize my dog is still outside with this person. I head back to the front door, trying to make as little noise as possible to check whether the stranger is still there. Just like before, he's standing there, head bowed, looking at the doorknob. I tiptoe over to the laundry room and slowly open the door as quietly as possible. I can't see my dog anywhere and the side of my house is covered in gravel, so I knew I couldn't step outside without making a lot of noise. With my heart still pounding in my chest, I go to the front door to keep an eye on the stranger and to get a better look at him. I considered calling the police, but I didn't feel like they would take me seriously, since all this man was doing was standing in front of my house. I tried taking a picture of him with my cell phone, but my camera was only able to take pictures of the peephole and not the images behind the glass. All of a sudden, the man looks up directly at me. I swear he knew I was there. He glares at me, then opens his mouth to show his taunting, malicious grin. He stood there that way for a few seconds. With that, he turns around and starts to walk down the street. I stay in the same place, almost expecting him to rush back and start pounding on the door. But luckily, my husband got back after a few minutes. Long story short, he convinced me to call the police and we went out looking for our dog. It turns out that this man had cut the end of the line connected to the pipe, and our dog decided that this was a good time for him to explore my neighbor's backyard, which was where we found him. It's been 3 years since this happened, and we've since moved to a new house for unrelated reasons, and the police weren't able to come up with any suspects. Ever since then, we take our dog on very long walks before the sun goes down. This happened in the fall of 1993 when I was 20 years old. In the interest of context, this was before I started college and I was working in the material prep department of a plastics factory on the night shift. I was the only woman in the department and my male coworkers were initially skeptical that I could handle the job. But I proved myself and earned their respect. It was hard work, but on the plus side, it put me in the best shape of my life. It was also about the same time that I dumped my abusive boyfriend. He was verbally, emotionally. When I was about 13, my parents and I moved to an old house. It was at least 90 years old. It was large and it was in pretty good condition for a house that old. I was an only child and I got the second biggest room on the second floor, and that room was huge. Sometimes my parents left me at home by myself for a few hours. Whether they were going shopping or on a date, I always asked to stay at home. I didn't mind staying at home because I like to think of myself as responsible and trustworthy. It made me feel special. One night, at around 6 p.m. or so, my parents had to go run some errands. They were the kind of people who spent long hours out shopping for the best deals, and they used a lot of coupons on whatever they could. And I didn't want to be involved in any of that at all, so I decided not to go and stayed home. I stayed in my room and watched some TV. Then, at around 8 p.m., I got hungry and decided to get a snack. Now, at this point the house is very dark, so I grab my cell phone and use it as best as I can to light up the hallway, since the hallway didn't have a light. Now, this was before cell phones had built-in flashlights, so I just used all the light my screen could give until I made it to the kitchen. The kitchen light had been left on by my parents. I put my phone on the counter. As I was walking to the pantry, I saw a man hunched down in the corner by the back door. He was wearing black and red clothing and he had long, greasy, unkempt hair. I didn't see his face because his head was facing the wall. He was holding a large knife. He didn't notice that I had spotted him. I wanted to scream, but I just covered my mouth and walked back upstairs, leaving my cell phone down there. I was not going to walk over to get it. We didn't have any phones upstairs, so I walked into my room, locked the door, and hid in the closet. I started crying silently and started thinking the worst. He was going to find me and kill me, I just knew it. Then I heard someone coming up the stairs. Heavy footsteps. I felt sick and I had never been so afraid in my life. Then I heard someone open the door to my parents' room, which was 2 rooms away from mine. I then hear police sirens outside and I hear the door being knocked on. I breathe a sigh of relief. I hear the man running back down the stairs quickly and he's trying to open our back door. Then I hear our front door being pushed down and I hear footsteps of 2 people coming upstairs. The police come to my room and they let me know it's safe. I open the door. I later found out that our neighbors saw this man unlocking our back door with a key and saw that he had a knife and called the police. My parents arrived a few minutes later and my mom started hugging me and crying. The man unfortunately escaped. I cried and got no sleep that night. Because the man had a key, we got the lock changed, but we eventually moved way out of state. I'm 23 now and I have moved past it, but there are several questions I still have. How did he get a key? Why did he want to come into our house? And what would he have done if the police showed up any later? I'm a 25-year-old female and I've been living with my boyfriend for the last 6 years. This happened about 4 years ago. I was online a lot and still am, and I met a lot of cool people. Many of them had rough backstories, but I always offered a listening ear and tried to support them. I'm going to mention that I have autism and can be pretty naive, so I don't recognize certain bad situations right away. I ended up meeting a 24-year-old guy from Australia who had just broken up with his girlfriend. He said that she was emotionally unstable and that it ended with her wanting to kill herself and him not being able to handle it anymore. I talked to him about it a lot and tried to help him cope with the situation. We started to play games together online and I started to see him as a friend. But after a while, I started to notice that he was kind of acting like I was his girlfriend. I shrugged it off because he knew that I had a boyfriend and it might have just been kindness that I mistook. I'm pretty famous for being oblivious to that kind of stuff. He started to tell me that I should break up with my boyfriend, going on long tangents and writing me emails about how my boyfriend was like his ex-girlfriend. That he abused me mentally and physically, that he was raping me, was making my life a living hell, and that he was going to kill me one day. Which was all completely absurd, and I kept explaining that to him. After a while, it was obvious that he indeed thought of me as his new girlfriend. He made it clear that we were going to spend the rest of our lives together and that he would make sure of it. He was convinced that me telling him to stop and leave me alone was all orchestrated by my boyfriend and that I was actually being held hostage. Luckily, he didn't know my full name, or so I thought, or where I lived. I started getting messages from random accounts with pictures of people bloodied up saying, "This is going to happen," all with his name on the pages itself. This went on for a while. I begged him to stop, but he kept pushing. I had blocked him, but he kept making new accounts to get in contact with me. I decided to just delete my account on that site altogether and not go on there anymore, and I hoped it would go away. But then I suddenly started to get messages on Facebook. I never even told him my full name, and even then I made sure my Facebook is extremely private. I used a family nickname and I only had other family members on there. My boyfriend didn't even have a Facebook account. And like I said before, I kept my full name and location to myself. He made about 150 pages and profiles completely directed to me, with pictures of people killing themselves, telling me he was going to kill himself, complete with the overlays and banners of "This is your fault." It seemed like he made it his full-time day job to send me messages on different platforms. He even found stuff like my YouTube account and followed me around there. Eventually, he started sending receipts of his school books that he had sold of his current school year. And later, one plane ticket to the airport where I actually lived close to, and 2 back to Australia. He kept sending me, quote, proof. Like of him moving out of his apartment and putting stuff into storage. He told me he was coming to save me from my boyfriend who had kept me hostage, and that he was going to kill him and take me back to Australia so I could be safe. He had gotten rid of all the ties he had. He quit school and quit his job so that we could have a blank slate, telling me we'd have to live under the radar for a while. All the while, he kept sending me pictures as proof of doing these things because he loved me and wanted to show it. By now, I had blocked every Facebook account with his, unfortunately, extremely common name, and basically deleted every other online account I had. Even though a lot of them were under different names, he found me everywhere. Eventually, the day came where he was taking pictures at the airport, which he was then posting to Facebook. And I immediately recognized the logos as my country's official airline. He began talking about the actual house I lived in. Keep in mind, I don't live in some normal place. I lived on an industrial area and a maintenance apartment inside a huge empty building with only one other office. The whole building was open to me and there weren't any people living remotely nearby. He definitely couldn't have just known I lived there. He started messaging about how perfect the whole setup was for his plans. My boyfriend was aware of everything that had happened by then, and thought it was best if maybe we'd sought out the help of police to give us some advice. But of course they couldn't do anything and suggested that if we were scared we better just go somewhere else. And we decided to go stay at my parents'. We went back the next day since we both had school and work, but we saw police cars in front of the building. The owner informed us that someone had broken in. This person had tried to go into the office next to our apartment, and they had an alarm system that went off and alerted the cops. At that point, I wanted to know what the hell was going on and if he had tried to break in, since that was our first guess. It wasn't hard contacting him since he already sent me multiple messages again on Facebook from several different accounts. My boyfriend contacted him and the guy agreed to have a webcam chat. And when he turned his cam on, I immediately recognized the hallmark of our city from the window behind him. I silently freaked out, not letting him know that I was present. My boyfriend then spent more than 7 hours talking to him. The guy was furious and still certain that my boyfriend was going to kill me, and nothing could change his mind. After more than 7 hours with my normally calm boyfriend getting pretty annoyed at this point, the guy started copying and pasting whole chat conversations and spin them in crazy ways. The guy then started saying he was disgusted and started to throw out profanities towards him about me, basically saying that if I was so adamant on staying with him, that I deserved what my boyfriend was going to do to me and that he wouldn't mourn me, because I had apparently ruined his, my own, and our kids' lives together. I only heard from him one more time after that. A short video of him being in the hospital saying he had tried to kill himself and that it was all my fault, and that I was going to bring darkness over the earth instead of light, quote, like I promised. He said stuff like that often, and other weird spiritual promises he said I made. I got scared again for a while, but it got silent after that. Even though it was years ago, I'm still afraid the guy isn't over me and that he'll come after me. But as far as I know, his parents had him locked in a nursing home for the mentally ill. I got this information a year later when his older brother finally responded to my Facebook messages to him telling him to please speak to his brother, because he was not okay. Anyways, that's my story, and I hope I never hear from the guy again. My husband was almost abducted. I think about this exact moment when he and I get in a disagreement and immediately stop being mad at him. The idea that I almost lost him and never would have known what happened is enough to calm even my most justified anger. This happened about 3 years ago. I was 24 and he was 25. It had pretty much been just me and him since we were 17 and 18, so my whole world was almost snatched away. It was late at night and I'd just picked him up from work and we'd stopped at a Harris Teeter for a bottle of wine and pizza. I had both of our cell phones in my purse because that's just how we did it when we were out together. He didn't like having it in his back pocket. Also, there's no way to say this without sounding weird, but my husband is very pretty. I mean, he's handsome, but he's got long, curly black hair and a slight build. And we both look way younger than we actually are. It's made us targets for more than a few weirdos. So we're in line and we're about to pay and he realizes he left his wallet in the car. The store was pretty much empty and there was no one behind us, so he said that he'll be right back and ran out into the dark parking lot. Now, I'm anxious anyway, so when he was gone for literally 4 minutes, I ran outside to look for him. I saw a black truck with a topper on it driving away under the single street light and my husband was nowhere in sight. My knees felt like jelly, and I never understood that saying until that moment. I ran to our car praying he was in there, and thank God, or whoever he was. He was sitting in our locked car staring after the truck until I very loudly smacked the passenger window. He looked at me with giant terrified eyes and yelled for me to get in. He leaned over and unlocked my door and yelled at me to lock it back when I sat down. He was shaking and freaking out and hugging me. I finally just squeezed him and asked him what the fuck happened. He asked for his phone and called 911. I heard the story as he was telling it to the operator and it still makes me want to throw up when I think about it. He had walked out to the car and noticed the black truck 1 lane over. We both worked in stores in that shopping center and had never been afraid of the parking lot, but luckily, It sent up a red flag and he hurried. As he fumbled with the keys, he heard the truck start up and figured it was leaving. In the time it took for him to grab his wallet out of the seat and turn around, the truck was behind him and a big man had opened the trunk. As the man turned around to face him, my husband just fell back into our car and slammed the door. The man didn't try the door right away. Instead, he hit the window in anger, and that's what saved my husband, because he managed in that moment to lock the doors. The man just stood there for a whole minute looking around and tried opening the door twice. Then he paced for a few seconds, then went back to the front of his truck and dug around. The whole time, my husband sat in horror without his phone. I wish he'd thought to honk the horn or something to scare the guy or get someone's attention, but he was way too scared to think. Finally, the man just climbed into the cab and sat until I guess he saw me running out of the store and zoomed off. The police arrived and my husband gave a description of the truck and the man. He was tall, big, white, balding, and dressed in all black like a sweatsuit. The truck either didn't have a license plate or he'd covered it. From what we know, they didn't find him, and we've since moved out of the state. So that's how my husband was almost kidnapped for what I refuse to imagine. I stayed awake for nights just holding him and feeling him breathe. I can't believe I almost lost him. After the shock wore away, he became rather serious about working out because the fact that he wouldn't have been able to fight the man off haunts him. Fuck that guy for making my husband a victim. Remember when deep web stories were the fad? Every week you'd find a new tale of someone going too far on the deep web, finding something terrible and ending up getting attacked for speaking out against it. This story's a bit similar. The difference is, I still love the deep web. Let me explain. I was a senior in high school at the time and I was definitely no popular kid. My friends were the oddities of the school, the few people who dared to defy the norm. It was them who told me about the deep web, a place on the internet where you are completely unwatched, anonymous, capable of doing whatever you want. Of course I was intrigued. Most of my friends just used it to buy drugs, but I thought a little bigger. I wanted to know what happened in the darkest parts of the deep web. Whether or not my friends were telling the truth when they talked about horrible fetish sites and assassins you can hire to kill anyone you like. Of course, I wasn't planning on using any of it. I've never been particularly interested in sex, so fetish sites don't interest me. And there's really nobody I'd like to kill. It was really the mystery of it all that fascinated me. Going to these sites would be like peering into a side of the world only a few have ever seen. Like a whole new experience. At the time, I was tired of the monotony of life. I'd get up at the same time every day, go to school, attend the same classes, talk to the same people, go home, play some games, do homework, and go to sleep. And then it'd repeat. I wondered if other people got tired of that. Anyway, it took me a while to actually dive into the deep web. As fascinated as I was, I'd been warned of what could happen to me. I read the stories I talked about too. Who isn't afraid of being threatened by hackers or stalked by some creep you piss off online? That kind of shit kept me from actually going on the deep web. Until the day I manned up and decided it was time to break the monotony. It was time to delve into the underbelly of the internet. Time to see a world I had only dreamed of. For the first week or so, it was fucking boring. It was just drug sites and stuff where people exposed to government secrets or whatever. Nothing as dark as I expected. I don't even do drugs, so that was useless to me. And I wasn't into politics. There wasn't really much I was into back then. So I was disappointed. The only reason I kept exploring was my sheer desire to experience the world I thought existed on the deep web. That world was darker than any drug site. That world had murder, torture, fucked up porn for fucked up people, and all sorts of nasty shit. I eventually got my wish. Just when my apathy towards the deep web got to its highest point, I found what I was looking for. The site didn't have a name, and I thought it was a broken link for a bit since it only led me to a black screen. Right before I could click out, however, a chat box opened on the screen. Someone using the name admin typed in the chat box saying, "Congrats, you found the worst place on the fucking net." I stared at the screen, more bemused than afraid. It took me a moment to type back, "Cool." That's all I said. I mean, what else was there to say? "I'm here to see your finest torture porn?" A moment after, the admin replied, "You want in?" I hesitated, all those horror stories flooding back into my head, but it was too late to chicken out. This is what I came here for. Even if I was just going to click out at the first sign of danger, I had to see what was there. I had to break the fucking monotony. I had to know. I hastily typed back, not allowing myself to stop. "Yeah," I said. The chat box closed and I was led directly to what looked like a video, with another chat box next to it. There were around 5 other people there, each eagerly waiting for something. The video was in black and white and showed a small room. The only thing inside was a wooden chair until, after around 5 minutes of waiting, the door to the room opened. A man was shoved inside, blindfolded and naked, all except for a pair of black briefs. He was followed by a woman, this one dressed in all black and her face covered by a mask. In an instant, the chat room went wild. I almost closed the window to spare myself, knowing immediately where this was going, but again, I told myself that this was what I wanted. Maybe not the torture, but the window into the very worst parts of the world. The woman pulled a knife from her pocket and cut off the man's blindfold as she shoved him into the chair. He didn't struggle for a moment, and once his eyes were visible, I could see why. It looked like he'd been drugged. Resisting was impossible. I frowned, glancing to the side. This was fucked up. I knew this was fucked up. My conscience told me to call the cops or at least click out, but I forced myself to watch. She turned the camera, pointing the knife at the man's throat. One of the people in the chat typed, "One of the fingers, cut off one of his fingers." I clenched my hands into fists, taking a sharp breath. Was this really fucking happening? Was I gonna just watch as this guy got mutilated as a small crowd of people watched in glee? I felt like throwing up. A feeling that only worsened when the woman nodded and turned to the man, grabbing his limp hand and carefully slicing off one of his fingers. Blood spurted from the wound and the man moaned in pain, but he couldn't fight back. Breathing heavily, I hovered my cursor over the X, planning on getting the fuck out of there, but I didn't. The woman looked unimpressed, as if she thought the people in the chat could do better. Another person called for a slice up the man's arm, and she complied. He was bleeding heavily now, clearly in deep pain, but these people were fucking sick. They were cheering her on from chat, suggesting new and painful tortures for her to inflict. Eventually, I stopped breathing heavily. I stopped feeling sick. It was starting to grow on me. By the end, the man was on the ground, covered in blood and breathing heavily. I watched this for around half a minute. The people in chat were starting to die down. They'd inflicted enough pain. They had their fun. It seemed like things were wrapping up. Funny, I thought, how it was over just when I was getting into it. I smirked. This was exciting. This was better than any game I could play, much better than any fucking class I could attend. Better than sitting with a group of fucking nobodies pretending like I cared for a goddamn second about them. This was the world I wanted to see. This was darkness. This was the underbelly. This was reality. Fucking end him. Slit the throat. I typed in chat for the first time. She nodded for one last time. bringing the man to his feet before slowly dragging her blade across his throat, sending more of his blood spurting out. Once it was done, she dropped him and he fell to the ground limp. He was dead. The people in chat started complimenting the torturer, talking about how it had been another good time, starting to set a date for the next showing. On screen, the woman left the room, leaving the corpse behind. Of course, I hastily wrote down the date for the next showing. This was going to be a part of my life now. I was going to be a part of something bigger. I was going to command these people's deaths. What a rush. So, yeah, I still love the deep web. I'm in college now, and now I'm even more immersed in the deep web. I've seen some shit people would freak out just knowing exists. I fucked around every sick porn site known to man. I've finally broken the monotony of life. Inspirational, right? How one high schooler defies the boredom inherent in his life by discovering his true passion. I love the deep web. So, I've been watching a YouTube series about deep web exploration. I won't name this series or the channel it belongs to. I mean, I'm not getting paid for advertisements. Anyway, I looked up a video on how to access said deep web. I did it fast and dirty, not much research on what not to do. Big mistake. Let me tell you right now, using Windows on the deep web is a bad idea. That much I did know. Easy to get hacked that way since it's the most prominent OS. I know you can boot up a live USB on a Linux clone OS. I mean, a simple Google search can tell you how to do that. It's not as difficult as it sounds. But I figured if my laptop gets hacked, I'm screwed. I can't exactly afford to just buy a new one right now. So I thought I'd be smart and use my Android tablet. What a genius, right? Yeah, I know. I'm an idiot. So a few VPN apps later and I'm surfing the deep web, looking around like a little kid in an adult store. I have no clue what any of it means, but I'm interested in it all. I'm aware you can find a lot of snuff and pedo rings, so I treaded carefully. Unfortunately, I stumbled upon one of the two. I'm not going to say which, but it made me sick to my stomach and I nearly quit then and there. In fact, I did, for a few minutes. I chalked it up to bad luck and resolved to be more careful. I'm not into that shit, not by a long shot. I'm not some deviant with fetishes for snuff or kids. Jeez, man. That image will probably be burned into my brain for the rest of my miserable life. Anyway, I'm browsing for a few hours and it's after 3 a.m. I've heard it's better to use the deep web at night. Less traffic that way. I found a few interesting sites. There's tons of religious stuff on there. You'd be surprised how often you find Satanists. Or at least people who claim to be Satanists. Most of the time, it's likely to be some edgy teenagers rebelling against their religious families. I won't get into my religious views, don't worry. It even has several of its own social networks and email services. No, thank you. You're begging to be stalked by some creep if you use one of those. Or better yet, get scammed by a catfish or honeypot. There are loads of conspiracy blogs as well. Both interesting and hilarious. Everything from Justin Bieber is secretly a reptilian member of the Illuminati to leaked files on human experimentation. There was even a guy who claimed to have stumbled across interdimensional travel via falling into an actual rabbit hole. As in a literal physical hole in the ground made by a rabbit. I'd say you can't make this stuff up, but clearly you can. I was serious about the human experimentation, by the way. You're going to want to avoid that kind of stuff. If you had any faith in humanity, you'd lose it in a heartbeat. My God, I mean, I hope that stuff wasn't legit. Gun shops, drug shops, celebrity nudes, pirated movies, hackers for hire, hitmen, virus programmers, script kiddies, stolen credit cards, you name it. There was one site that sold stolen US currency that was supposed to be marked for shredding due to age or poor condition. Seems like they got a lot of business too. No wonder the economy is in the toilet. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of legitimate stuff on there too. I visited the site of a really smart dude who was creating his own custom operating system, even had games and stuff on it. There was funny things too. A mock cult made for people named Dan was among my favorites. The people that weren't maniacs seemed to be open-minded, if a little paranoid. Then I came across a site that supposedly gives you access to the webcams of people's personal laptops. I was curious. I shouldn't have been, I know. I'm not expecting to see some cam girls here. Just some slack-jawed people staring blankly at their screens while watching Let's Plays or some shit. And that's exactly what I saw. Neckbeards, teenagers, old men looking confused, the works. Here's me laughing at unsuspecting people. Then I saw myself. Ha ha, very funny, I thought sarcastically. It's tapping into my camera and trying to give me a good scare. It almost did, at first. Even so, I logged off. I kinda realized how bad what I was doing was. Not to mention how illegal it was. I went back to the clear web and watched some Netflix. Soon enough, I had all but forgotten about my deep web exploits. Then my Skype starts ringing. Another Skype number is calling me. I think maybe it's one of my friends trying it out. After all, I have been pestering one of them for a while to get on Skype so we can chat while playing games on Steam. So I pick it up. At first there was silence. Then I heard a voice. A man's voice. He sounded like he was an older guy, 50 plus. "Looking good," he said. Without a second's hesitation, I hung up, deleted every deep web related app on my tablet, shut down and restarted my router. I have no fucking clue how that guy got my Skype number. And to be quite honest, I don't want to know. All I know is, if you're going to use the deep web, I beg of you, for your own safety, do more research than I did. Talk to someone who has experience in setting up a proper VPN or some other kind of anonymity. You're sure as hell not going to find it on fucking Google Play. Well, you guys obviously liked the last McDonald's stories video I did, so I'm doing another one. Like I mentioned in the last McDonald's video I did, these stories aren't the type to make you sit in your room absolutely terrified. However, they are extremely creepy and odd. Anyways, let's begin. It was about 3 in the morning and I was on my way to my job at my local McDonald's to open with one of my favorite managers there with me. She told me to text her when I got there so that she could let me inside. Once I pulled in, I noticed a man standing outside of his car in the farthest corner of the parking lot. He was shooting me this sort of menacing stare. Let me point out that it's completely pouring outside. I was really confused as to why this guy wasn't just sitting in his car. I then parked and texted my manager to let me inside. Seconds later, I noticed her at the door opening it for me. Upon walking up to her, I say my usual good morning. I was stopped mid-sentence by her rushing me inside and saying, "Did you see that guy outside?" I told her yes, and she proceeded to help me refill sauces, napkins, and things like that. My manager then told me that she's going to check the security tapes just to make sure that everything during the period that the restaurant was closed was okay. Minutes later, my manager called me into her office for whatever reason. She told me to look at the screen and it showed that the same man was standing outside. The time was 12:47. She then fast-forwarded the tape to reveal that the man had been standing outside the entire time up until now. And at this point, it's about 3:50 a.m. I ran to the front lobby and I noticed him still standing over by his car. I figured, or was hoping, that he was probably just on something and he was waiting for us to open so that maybe he could get breakfast. I resumed filling sauces again and making sure everything was in working order, until I was abruptly interrupted by banging at the front door. I walked over and noticed a figure right outside the front door. It was the man. I yelled that we were closed and that he would have to come back later. That didn't seem to faze him as he continued to bang on the door. I walked away, figuring that he was just being an asshole, when suddenly I heard a loud crash. I ran to the lobby to see the glass door broken and the man beginning to step inside. I yelled for my manager and told her that we needed to leave through the back door. And we did just that. We booked it to our cars and both called the cops. They arrived in about 15 minutes and came outside the restaurant with a dirty-looking man in cuffs. They said he was hiding in the back janitor's closet with a large knife in his hand. So that's my story, and also the reason I'm never working early mornings again. I've been working at McDonald's now for over 5 years, and this is still my creepiest experience there. This happened 2 years ago when I was 18 and I had been working my first overnight shift on front counter. I usually work in the kitchen on overnights, so I had no interactions with any of the customers until then. I was working from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m., which is a usual overnight shift for us. Around 3 a.m., I was making some fries when I noticed a man standing there and trying to take pictures with his cell phone of me and my other female coworker, Rebecca. I pointed it out to her and she just rolled her eyes in annoyance and went to take an order on drive-thru, telling me it happened a lot from people. I was instantly uncomfortable. I wanted to tell the manager, but he was in the office doing his manager stuff and I really didn't want to bother him. I went over with what felt like a nervous smile and quickly did my usual greeting. "Hi, what can I get for you?" He just kinda looked at me and stayed quiet. He was about 5'8", white, early 20s, medium build with dark hair and brown eyes. An average man, I would say, but something about his piercing glare made me feel super uncomfortable. Then he smiled a smile that sent shivers down my spine. "I'll just have a coffee black, sweetie," he said, and I could instantly smell the alcohol in his breath. I nodded and told him the price before he pulled out a $5 bill and went to hand it to me, making sure our hands touched. I avoided his gaze and went to hand back his change when he winked and went to go wait for the coffee. I went to go make it as fast as I could, but just my luck, we were out of coffee on both the front counter and the drive-thru, as we don't sell much through the night. I turned around and kept as little eye contact as I could. "I'm sorry, I'm going to have to brew you a fresh pot. Should only take about 3 minutes." "Don't worry, I don't mind. I have quite the view while I wait," he replied, shooting me a wink, and I just smiled awkwardly and looked away. I had to make sure I didn't fall behind on my shift, so I began to set up the muffins on the display so that we had them all ready for breakfast, which in Canada starts at 4 a.m. "So, Susan," I heard from behind me, realizing it was the guy. I instantly tensed, wondering how he knew my name before I noticed I had my name tag on and quietly cursed to myself. I turned around and looked at him and he said, "So, what time are you stuck here until tonight, beautiful?" I instantly panicked, as I don't do well in situations like this. 7. I said nervously, which then the guy gave me a huge grin. "Oh, so you still have time before you're off, eh?" I nodded and noticed the coffee was done pouring, so I went over and made his coffee as he watched me with an intense stare. I handed it to him before saying "have a nice night," earning me another wink. He then waved and said as he turned around, "I'll see you later, Susan." I watched as he walked out the door and tried to calm myself down. He doesn't actually know when I'm off, so I was okay, I thought to myself. 6 a.m. rolled around and it was finally time to go. I still felt a little paranoid about the guy, but knew it was now in the past. My coworker Chris was going to drop me off at home as we carpooled, so we got our stuff together and we left. As we were heading to his car, I noticed a parked car with someone in it, and of course, it was the guy. I panicked and quickly told Chris that that was the guy, as I had told him what had happened not long ago. He instantly brought me into his coat and did his best to keep me hidden as we walked to his car. He made sure no one followed the car, dropped me off, and watched as I went inside, telling me to stay safe. I thanked him before going into my house and going to bed. The next day, I went into work and got asked by my manager how I got home. I told them that Chris gave me a ride home. My manager got this confused look and said something that made my blood run cold. Oh, that's strange because some guy was here looking for you just before 7. He said he was there to pick you up. I thought before that the man's intentions weren't good. Just the way he looked at me and spoke to me like I was prey. And this pretty much confirmed it. Since then, I have refused to work front counter overnight shifts, and we no longer wear our name tags on overnight shifts. This may not be the scariest or most action-packed story ever, but this is seriously one of the creepiest encounters both me and my friend have ever had. So, me and my friends had just seen the new Leonardo DiCaprio movie, The Revenant, a film he deserves an Oscar for, I'd like to add. Anyway, once the movie had finished, my friends Owen and Samuel decided they weren't hungry and then headed home. Now it was only me and my other friend Jake left. We decided to hit the town and get something to eat for dinner. We looked in a few shops on the way, but we weren't really that interested in buying anything. We eventually decided to go to McDonald's. Yes, I know, it's not the best thing to have for dinner, but we were 14 and we weren't fussed about going to a bigger place to eat. After what felt like a lifetime walking down the town, we got to the McDonald's. We went to the bigger 2-story McDonald's as we were in the city center of Edinburgh and everywhere else was busy. Anyway, me and Jake took our food up to the 2nd floor as the 1st floor was pretty filled up. We sat down in a little section that had about 4 or 5 tables in it, only one of which was available. So we sat down at the free table and began to eat. I had just taken a bite out of my food when I looked up and noticed that an old woman sitting alone at the table behind us was staring at me. I dismissed it at first and thought maybe she was looking at the wall behind me. I didn't think much of it. I mean, who would, right? I have a tendency to look around the room I'm in when I'm eating, so my eyes did occasionally look past the woman. When my eyes did pass the woman, however, she, yes, you guessed it, was still staring at me. I didn't know whether or not I should tell Jake about it at this point. He was facing me, so he couldn't see her, and I also thought I was being paranoid at first. But at this point, red flags were now definitely going off in my head. The woman didn't even have anything in front of her to eat. There was just a coffee cup on her tray, which was clearly empty. She was wearing a bright pink jacket and had a big stain on the right shoulder and dark blue glasses that made her eyes look huge. A few minutes passed and she was still staring at me. But now her eyes were as wide as physically possible, so it's fair to say at this point she was glaring at me. I don't even think she was blinking either, which was really adding to the things that were off about this woman. I tried my best not to lock eyes with her, but it was quite difficult. After another 2 minutes of the woman staring directly at me, I decided that it was time to tell Jake what was going on, because I was starting to feel uneasy and he was picking up on it. I didn't want her to hear me speaking as our tables were relatively close to each other, so I picked up my phone and texted Jake what was happening. He tried to turn around, making it look like he was just looking around. He noticed her as well, and we tried laughing it off, which was working until things got a little weirder. The woman started talking to herself, glaring at me still. From this point on, when I looked in her direction, she would raise her hands to her face and start aggressively whispering to them. And she was spitting everywhere, and when I looked away from her, she dropped her hands back onto her lap and began glaring again, still occasionally saying things to herself. Neither me or Jake could make out what she was saying, but I'm pretty sure I heard her say she was speaking to someone called John. The stares, glares, and whatever you want to call it continued and continued. By this point, I could barely focus on eating, and neither could Jake. Now thinking about it, I think she was done with her drink before we even sat down, so why stay so long? She started getting louder with her conversation, but everyone at the tables around us were oblivious to what was happening. The seconds that passed felt like minutes now, and she was practically yelling things to herself. When she did, I made clear eye contact with her after this, and I swear she said something directly to me in an aggressive whisper, but it was too quiet to make out. I think she said something along the lines of "you mutt" at the end of her sentence. Me and Jake decided to wait this out and just sit until she left. We had long finished our food by this point. Unless she was whispering to her hands, she was still glaring at me, now with a horrifying grin which made my skin crawl. Is this woman crazy? Or is she just a really socially awkward freak that liked to stare at boys eating? The woman eventually got up. On her way out, she violently threw her handbag at the floor, yelled something at the top of her voice at it, picked it up intensely, and stormed down the stairs out of sight. I had no idea what had just happened, but her face definitely sent shivers down my spine, and her behavior was beyond abnormal. Me and Jake sat there for another few minutes to make sure she had definitely left and not gone to the bathroom or something. Then we practically legged it out of there and we never saw her again. Like I said, not an action-packed story, but just imagine if all of this had happened to you. It would definitely creep you out and make you feel uncomfortable. It certainly made me feel uneasy anyway. Since then, I have never gone to that particular McDonald's at night again. I remember working the night shift the other night at a local McDonald's. I had to fill in for my friend Kiara, who called in sick. This night was probably one of the most terrifying nights I have ever worked. It was dead around 11 p.m. and I was asked by the manager to sweep the floors until a customer came in. One customer came in and he looked a bit rough. Bald, long rusty beard, glasses, sandals, and just clothes that had stains on them. I go over to the register and say, "Hi, can I get you anything?" He then said, "Yes, can I have a large coffee, please?" I take his order, give him his coffee, and tell him to have a wonderful night. He smiles. I go to sweep the floor again, and I see the man is sitting a bit close to where I would be sweeping, which is usually under the tables and just around the floor. When I reached his table, he says, "You're very beautiful." I smile and say, "Thank you very much." He says, "Can I give you a ride home when you get off work?" I say no thank you and that I have a ride home. He went from the nice man that I had took the order from to just pure rude. He asks me, "What's your schedule?" I tell him that I'm not allowed to give that information out, sorry. He takes his coffee and goes back outside. The next night after that, Kiara and I worked together with my other guy friend, Jack. I told Kiara about the guy from the night before and she gave me this weird facial expression. Jack comes over to me and says, "Hey, is everything okay?" I tell him about the guy from the night before and he gave me a look of terror. What he said to me ran chills down my spine. "That man called the restaurant earlier and asked about you." Just then, my blood ran cold as I saw the man walk back into the restaurant. Kiara's face went pale and Jack's jaw was dropped. My stomach turned in knots as I said, "Hi, can I get you anything tonight?" He says, "No, but can I take you home?" Jack steps out and says, "No, she ain't going anywhere with you. Get out of here before I call the cops." The manager got pissed off at Jack for leaving his position at the drive-thru window while Kiara was frying burgers. Jack agreed to switch positions with me until the morning crew came in. The manager asked me to take the trash outside, and I nervously said okay. Jack, on the other hand, was pissed that the manager even asked me to do that. Jack was nice enough to take it out for me. I stayed inside while Jack took out the trash. Jack comes back in and pulls me to the janitor's closet and says, "That guy was waiting for you in his truck with 5 other big guys in there." I felt sick to my stomach when he said that. Jack informs the manager, and the manager, like the asshole that she was, says, "He's not gonna hurt anyone. He's harmless. Get back to work." The next morning, me and Jack worked together and my other coworker Taylor informed me that the man had came back and told her my schedule, and that he'll wait for me to come back in today. Eventually, he came in. Jack, being the good friend that he was, told him to get the hell out of the restaurant and to never come back again or else he would call the cops. Jack lost his job because of this, but to me he was just looking out for me. I cried so hard when Jack lost his job because I know Kiara and I would be working alone without anyone else there to protect us. But I never saw the man again after that. I quit my job at McDonald's and so did Kiara. Me, Jack, and Kiara now live in the same apartment building and work at a grocery store. I don't know what could have happened to me if I took out the trash that night and not Jack. I had cared for an elderly woman with no family who came to us when her husband died. She didn't speak often, but when she did, it was usually just words that made no sense together. I felt so bad for her because ever since she had arrived, so many of the residents in her area that she seemed to enjoy spending time with had passed in such a short time span. She put up a picture of each of them next to her pictures of her husband and several others who were probably family to remember them. I had always just felt so sorry for her, and so I showed her extra attention and we eventually became pretty close. It just seemed so unfair that she had such luck and kept losing people that she cared about. One day, she looked at me and said, plain as day, "Sweetie, I think I'm done now," and handed me a picture. It was a picture of me, and I smiled because it touched my heart that I was that important to her. She passed nearly a week later, and I cried for days. It really hit me hard. She knew it was the end for her, and she said goodbye as best as she could. A little less than 2 years later, I was talking with a colleague and she came up in conversation. My colleague referred to her as "that crazy bitch," which seemed very out of character for her, and it shocked and offended me deeply. I expressed this to her, not so nicely, and she looked at me with this shocked look and said, "Oh, dear, do you not know?" and then explained something to me that I hadn't known. As it turned out, it came out sometime after she had passed that she had killed her husband by poisoning him, and that there was an investigation because it appeared that she had a ritual of befriending someone, obtaining a picture of them, and hiding the picture until she could kill them, usually by poisoning, and then displaying the picture as a sort of trophy. It was suspected that this may have been the reason for the spike in mortality rate during her stay, and the considerable number of photos in her collection. Last I heard, the old family photos weren't any relation to her, and the police were trying to ID the individuals and compare them to several cold cases. CNA here. I've been working night shifts at hospitals for about 7 years now, and I have quite a few stories. I went into work one night and Jen, one of the nurses, told me and my coworker Jay the creepiest thing happened a few hours earlier. A patient had passed abruptly in one of the rooms. The room was cleaned and was quickly occupied by another patient who had coded, was pronounced dead but was resuscitated. Soon after being admitted to his room, he started to complain to the nurse. He kept saying things like, "I can't be in here. This man won't stop looking at me. He's really worried about his dog. His dog doesn't know that he's dead." She had assumed he was just seeing things and said, "Oh yeah, well, what does he look like?" He described the deceased patient perfectly. I could see the chills running down her spine as she was telling us her story. Turns out, the man did have a dog as well. The new admit was moved to another room. Jay started talking about how he doesn't believe in ghosts, how they aren't real, how he wants to see it, and that tonight he's going to provoke it so it can show itself. 3 a.m. rolls around and all three of us are at the nursing station. Jay starts playing YouTube videos of various puppy sounds. Soon after, 2 lift team guys come up and we forget what we're doing and start another conversation. Suddenly, we all hear it, except for Jay. A dog bark in the same room, loudly, clear as ever. The lift team guys say, "Does someone have a dog in here?" Jen and I simultaneously shit ourselves. I have other stories, but that one really got to me. Shadow men are real, and I've seen one firsthand. And spirits love playing with elevators. I'm a 20-year-old male. I'm not a huge guy. I stand 5'7", 160 pounds. For this story, I will be using abbreviations of the areas around where I live. Those who have been near Philly will probably be able to understand them, but honestly I don't give a fuck. I live in a town I'll call T-Dale, Pennsylvania, close to a town I'll call Seaville, which some in our area consider the equivalent to Philly due to violence, drugs, etc. I work security in a hospital within this town, where my job puts me in the psych ward, morgue, and ER. Yeah, I know it's kind of all over the place, but this is important. I'm going to tell 2 stories. Before I continue, I'm warning you that these will, indeed, be very graphic and disturbing. This is your only disclaimer. The things I've done here stuck with me, and there isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about some of these occurrences. It's a less affluent hospital. So much so that the hospital kind of abuses our security contract and has us do some wild things that we probably shouldn't be doing. Obviously, with nearby Seaville, we get some very lower class people coming by and fucking shit up with their drugs. The first story I'll be telling deals with the morgue. As usual, I received a call from the ICU that someone had recently passed away, so I went to bag the body. The man who passed was an older man, probably around late 50s to mid 60s. I didn't ask how he died because, let's face it, it's not my problem or concern. So I slapped on my gloves and got him into the body bag. Before I zipped the bag, I stopped and I stared at him. I felt odd and uncomfortable. I've dealt with far more fucked up bodies, missing limbs or exposed organs, but this one had no apparent injuries, and yet I was so uncomfortable. Anyway, I snapped out of my haze, zipped him up for the funeral home, and dragged his ass down to the morgue. I followed procedures and placed him in the freezer. Keep in mind that I brought his body down on a cart and only moved his body from the bed to the cart, so there wasn't a whole lot of movement. Anyway, I placed him in the freezer and waited for the funeral home to arrive. When they did, I brought them to the freezer where I would transfer the body into their possession. It's actually more of a hassle than it is a complex job. Just find the bag, have them sign, and pick them up to put them on the cart. So I pull my new friend out of the freezer for the funeral home, and immediately things start to become weird. The funeral home claimed I had the wrong body, and I'm just like, what the fuck? There was no way it was the wrong body. There were only 2 bodies in the freezer, the other body being a 16-year-old who had been hit by a fucking train, so there was no way that I messed this up. After some minor accusations, the funeral home realized it was the right body. I mean, come on, it's kinda hard not to. There's a tag on the outside of the bag with their name on it, which the man looked at for a solid minute before even agreeing. But then it happened. One man unzipped the bag and I was forced to take a step back. The man I had just placed in the morgue was contorted, with his arm behind his back laying on his right side and his left arm strewn in front of him. And his mouth, it was frozen in a scream with his eyes bulging. My mind raced. How could this be? I laid him in the bag on his back with his arms at his side. And before you say someone else touched the body or moved it, you're wrong. I was the only officer on duty and I had the only keys to the freezer, so I was the only one with access. I would never be disrespectful or unprofessional. And to adjust his mouth or eyes, how could his body possibly have been fucking contorted? The funeral manager began to rant about how it was possible I could be such a scumbag to leave the body in such a manner. I was silent. There was nothing I could say. They re-zipped the body and left angrily. I was still in shock. I mean, I don't know how he died, but I know he didn't die screaming. To this day, I'm still baffled about the whole thing. Another story I have is on my second day when I was working in the psych ward and got a call from my manager. He told me to report down to the ER right away. I was nervous because I thought, shit, did I already fuck my job up? I walk on down to the ER and meet up with my manager, who was in the presence of 2 other guards. He walks up to me and tells me the scenario, and apparently a family came in to see their 4-year-old daughter in the ER. The mother, father, and grandparents were waiting for the doctor. The only problem was, they didn't realize the 4-year-old girl was already dead. The story goes, the girl was sitting on the back of her father's tractor and he had put it in reverse. Somehow, the girl slipped and the father unfortunately didn't know until it was too late. Her skull was crushed by the tractor wheel and she most likely died almost instantly. We were there to make sure the family didn't freak out too badly, and what ensued I will never forget and be tortured by for the rest of my life. When the doctor finally appeared and gave the grave news, I had to sit and listen to the family scream, screech, cry, and curse for 2 hours. Their yells of pain are burned into my brain and I still hear it sometimes. As the new guy, they sent me to do the next part with a former Marine. We walked to the room with the deceased and stared at what was in front of us. The corpse of a little girl lay before us on a table. Her skull was caved in and it looked as if you baked ziti with skull fragments, brains, and other stuff. The prior Marine and I froze and stood there for a minute. I honestly don't give a fuck about people and dead bodies don't faze me, but this being the first child I had to deal with, it really got to me. Slowly, with my shaking gloved hands, I moved the girl into the bag. Before I finished zipping the bag, I looked once more into the cavern that used to be capable of forming an innocent child's smile. No longer would it be able to. That image, along with the family's screams, will stick with me forever. I've always been depressed, but honestly, this job gave me a new feeling of respect for life. I've done a lot more fucked up things, but this is all I want to talk about for now. Maybe I'll send in more soon. I don't know, you can call bullshit, whatever. I needed to tell someone, and it took me a while to finally be comfortable with what's happened to me. I'm writing this on Christmas. I hope you all had a merry holiday, and hopefully I don't have to see you soon. Hey everyone, if you were looking for more creepy type hospital stories rather than unsettling or disturbing, I did a video a while back on hospital horror stories, but it's... When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with the... This story is told in the perspective of a female. This is a precautionary tale. I understand that this was all my fault, but even if I can help at least one person by telling my story, it's worth it. I don't drink as a general rule, but once a month or so I'll go out with friends and binge. My friends and I had a great night at a bar in the city and they eventually left. I was chatting up a guy, so I decided to stay. We went back to his place and after a while I'm ready to head home, so I call an Uber to pick me up. I don't know where I am. I know the city I'm in, but not my exact location. I ordered the Uber, but it's taking forever. Requesting, so I cancel it and I try again. Pretty soon a car pulls up. I drunkenly mumble something like, "Is this the Uber?" And I hop in. That was a mistake. Ubers apparently are supposed to have some kind of marking on the vehicle. The guy pulls away and starts driving. We're chatting, I'm fumbling for a cigarette, and the next thing I notice is that we're headed on the highway, but in the opposite direction of where I thought we needed to drive, and we're going at a solid 90 miles per hour. Then I get a call from my Uber driver. He's there and I'm not, because I'm in the car with the fucking nutcase.